Once an image is fractured in public, the crack becomes part of the story. And in Will Smith's case, the fracture wasn't subtle. It was replayed millions of times, meme-ified, slowed down, remixed, debated in classrooms, boardrooms, and living rooms around the world. The slap wasn't just an incident. It became shorthand. But how does a man who spent 3 decades mastering perception confront a moment he couldn't control? The architecture of control. Long before the Oscars, control had been Will Smith's obsession. He wasn't born into Hollywood royalty. He built himself from scratch, from West Philadelphia to global icon. As a teenager, he learned quickly that charisma was currency. With DJ Jazzy Jeff, he turned humor and rhythm into fame. But even then, there was calculation beneath the charm. Smith studied success patterns. He reportedly analyzed the 10 highest-grossing films of all time to identify what made them work. He paid attention to release dates, marketing strategies, genre cycles. He didn't stumble into superstardom. He engineered it. He avoided profanity in his early rap career to remain radio-friendly. He cultivated a clean image. When The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air launched, he leaned into relatability, the funny outsider navigating privilege. America didn't just watch him, they welcomed him. By the mid-90s, he made another calculated pivot. Action films were dominating global markets. So he became the blockbuster king. Independence Day. Men in Black. Enemy of the State. He was witty but not reckless. Tough but not threatening. Cool but not controversial. He wasn't unpredictable like some stars. He was dependable. And dependable pays. Studios saw him as insurance. International markets saw him as accessible. Families saw him as safe. That safety translated into $100 million opening weekends and global box office dominance. But here's a deeper question. What happens when a human being turns himself into a brand so successfully that even his flaws feel like marketing risks? Because behind every polished persona, there is a private cost. The fear beneath the smile. Will Smith has spoken openly, especially in recent years, about fear. Fear of failure. Fear of inadequacy. Fear of not being enough. In interviews and in his memoir, he described childhood moments that shaped him, particularly witnessing domestic violence between his parents. As a young boy, he felt powerless to protect his mother. That sense of helplessness carved something deep inside him. He has said that much of his life became an attempt to never feel powerless again. Think about that. A child who couldn't protect his mother grows into a man obsessed with strength, success, and control. He becomes the biggest movie star in the world. He commands rooms. He commands screens. He commands attention. But does external dominance ever fully silence internal insecurity? When Jada Pinkett Smith entered his life, she was not dazzled by his fame. She was strong, intellectually independent, emotionally complex. Their relationship wasn't a simple Hollywood romance. It was intense, philosophical, sometimes turbulent. They didn't want a traditional marriage. They spoke about partnership, growth, evolution. They rejected labels. For some, that was progressive. For others, confusing. But underneath the language of freedom and expansion, was there tension? Was there an unspoken pressure to maintain the image of enlightenment while privately struggling? Publicly, they were the evolved couple. Privately, they were human. And humanity is messy. The Internet era of dissection. In the 90s and early 2000s, stars controlled narratives more easily. Interviews were curated. Headlines moved slower. But by the 2010s, the Internet had changed everything. Moments could be clipped out of context and shared globally within minutes. Facial expressions became evidence. Silence became speculation. When Red Table Talk aired the now infamous entanglement conversation, millions watched in real time. Will sat across from Jada, listening as she described a romantic relationship during their separation. He nodded. He tried to smile. He said, "I'm going to get you back." The phrase was playful, but the Internet dissected every micro-expression. Was that pain? Was that humiliation? Was that forced composure? Memes flooded social media. TikTok edits amplified pauses. YouTube analysts slowed footage down frame by frame. For a man who built a career on controlling the frame was now controlling him. And here's the uncomfortable dynamic of modern fame: ridicule spreads faster than nuance. Did viewers know the full context of their marriage? No. Did that stop millions from forming conclusions? Of course not. The dependable hero began morphing into something else in the public imagination, a man perceived as emasculated, emotionally overexposed, struggling to maintain authority in his own narrative. How much of that perception was fair? How much was projection? And how much did it matter if perception alone could reshape reality? The Night of Impact. Now returned to the Dolby Theatre, March 27, 2022. The room glittered. The air was electric. Will Smith sat in the audience, nominated for King Richard, a performance widely praised as layered, disciplined, powerful. It was the kind of role that signals legacy. Not just box office appeal, but artistic respect. When Chris Rock made the G.I. Jane joke about Jada's shaved head, a reference to alopecia, a condition she had openly discussed, the initial laughter seemed routine. Will laughed. Then he looked at Jada. Her expression wasn't amused. It was weary. Hurt, perhaps. Annoyed. And in that split second, a glance, a breath, a flicker of something internal, a decision formed. He walked onto the stage. At first, many thought it was scripted. The Oscars love surprise bits. But then the sound landed. The slap echoed. The audience went silent. Rock stumbled. Wow. Back in his seat, Smith shouted twice, "Keep my wife's name out your mouth." The room froze. And in homes around the world, millions felt a cultural shift in real time. Was it chivalry? Was it ego? Was it delayed frustration from 2016? Was it accumulated humiliation from years of online mockery? Or was it simply a human breaking point, stripped of calculation? For a man who had built his empire on composure, the irony was devastating. Triumph entangled with consequence. Minutes later, he won Best Actor. The applause was standing. But it felt different. In his acceptance speech, he spoke about Richard Williams as a fierce defender of his family. He spoke about being called to protect. He apologized to the Academy, but not to Chris Rock. He cried. He trembled. He spoke about love making you do crazy things. The speech might have been remembered as heartfelt in another timeline. But now it was entangled. And entanglement, as the internet had already proven, is a word that lingers. Within days, statements were issued. Apologies followed, this time directly to Rock. The Academy convened emergency meetings. Debates raged. Should he have been escorted out? Should he have been allowed to accept the award? Eventually, the Academy banned him from attending its events for 10 years. 10 years. In Hollywood time, that's an era. Studios recalibrated. Some projects quietly disappeared from development slates. Others stalled in post-production. Publicists reassessed strategy. Because in Hollywood, trust is everything. And unpredictability threatens investment. Was Will Smith now a liability? Redemption in the age of cynicism. After a period of relative quiet, Smith returned with carefully framed introspection. Videos posted to social media. Long-form interviews. Discussions about trauma, ego, accountability. He acknowledged that he was wrong. He described the slap as unacceptable. He spoke about doing the internal work. But here's the paradox of public apology. Sincerity cannot be measured on a timeline. Some viewers believed him. Others saw image repair. Some appreciated vulnerability. Others felt fatigue. In a culture saturated with scandal, redemption arcs can feel formulaic. Step 1. Fall. Step 2. Apologize. Step 3. Rebrand. But is personal growth ever that linear? When his film Emancipation was released later in 2022, reactions were complicated. Critics debated whether audiences could separate art from incident. Some praised the performance. Others admitted distraction. The film itself became a test. Could talent outshine controversy? The box office numbers were modest. Not disastrous, but not dominant. It wasn't the roaring comeback some predicted. And so the larger question lingered. Can a star built on stability survive instability? The fragility of image. Hollywood has seen comebacks before. Robert Downey Jr. rebuilt a career from the brink of collapse. Mel Gibson's trajectory tells a more uneven story. Public memory is selective, sometimes forgiving, sometimes unforgiving. What makes Will Smith's situation unique is the contrast. He wasn't known for chaos. He wasn't a habitual provocateur. The slap felt like a glitch in a system designed for smooth performance. And glitches unsettle people. Because if the most disciplined star in Hollywood can snap under pressure, what does that say about the pressure itself? Was the slap an anomaly, or evidence that decades of brand maintenance were unsustainable? Perhaps the deeper story isn't about one night. Perhaps it's about the cost of perfection. When a human being spends years presenting only strength, what happens to the vulnerability beneath it? Does it leak out quietly, or explode publicly? Family, legacy, and the long view. In the aftermath, Jada continued speaking publicly about their relationship, clarifying that they had been separated for years at the time of the Oscars. That revelation reframed the narrative yet again. Separated. Not divorced. Still legally married. Privately complex. For observers, it was another twist. For the Smith family, it was life unfolding under a microscope. Jaden and Willow, now adults, navigated their own identities. They had grown up watching their parents dissected in headlines. They had experienced fame before adolescence. What does that do to a young mind? What does it mean to inherit both privilege and scrutiny? Will Smith once said he wanted to build a family dynasty, not just wealth, but influence. And in many ways, he succeeded. His children are artists in their own right. They experiment boldly. They reject conventional boxes. But dynasties are rarely simple. They are built not just on success, but on resilience. Can control be reclaimed? As of now, Will Smith continues working. Projects move forward. Appearances are strategic. The industry has not exiled him entirely. Time, as always, will shape the final verdict. But perhaps the more compelling question isn't whether he can return to his former box office glory. Perhaps it's this. Can he return to being dependable? Or has the world seen too much? Because once the myth of total control dissolves, something more human replaces it. And humanity is unpredictable. For decades, Will Smith sold the fantasy that chaos could be managed. Aliens defeated, robots outsmarted, apocalypses survived, as long as the right hero was in charge. Then, on one unguarded night, the hero faltered. And maybe that's the real story. Not the fall of a superstar, but the exposure of a man. A man shaped by fear, driven by ambition, uplifted by discipline, and undone, at least momentarily, by emotion. So what happens next? Does the public allow complexity? Does Hollywood reward humility? Does time soften memory? Or will that single resounding moment forever echo louder than 3 decades of carefully constructed excellence? The answer isn't written yet. But one thing is certain, the era of unquestioned control is over. And what replaces it may determine not just the future of Will Smith's career, but how we, as an audience, understand fame, failure, and forgiveness in the modern age. Smith also attempted to connect with younger audiences through online creators and streamers. The effort was bold, but often awkward. The charismatic veteran seemed slightly out of rhythm in digital spaces built on spontaneity and generational slang. Viewers didn't see seamless reinvention. They saw a man searching for relevance. Was he adapting, or trying too hard? Then, in 2025, he returned to where his career first began, music. He released an album titled Based on a True Story, his first full-length project in over 2 decades. The framing was clear. This was confession, not nostalgia. He sought advice from respected artists like Jay-Z and Kendrick Lamar. The guidance he reportedly received was simple. Stop performing the image. Tell the truth. And he tried. The album addressed ego, shame, and the Oscars moment directly. For the first time, he seemed less interested in being universally liked and more interested in being understood. But vulnerability is risky, especially when the audience is skeptical. Critics described the project as overly earnest and emotionally clumsy. Some listeners heard reflection, others heard defensiveness. Commercial response was lukewarm. Social media leaned toward mockery rather than empathy. Instead of reclaiming cultural ground, the album reinforced the perception that he was still wrestling publicly with the same defining moment. Which raises a larger question. When reinvention becomes constant, does it start to feel like instability? Today, Will Smith occupies an unusual space in Hollywood. He is not erased. He still works. Films are released. But the automatic goodwill, the assumption of steadiness, is gone. Studios proceed cautiously. Audiences evaluate carefully. Every appearance feels less like entertainment and more like assessment. Yet his story resists a simple ending. Unlike many public figures who vanish after scandal, Smith remained visible. He accepted consequences. He apologized repeatedly. He exposed himself to criticism rather than retreating into silence. That persistence complicates the narrative. Time has a way of softening edges. History sometimes rewrites harsh chapters. But legacy often hinges on moments. For decades, Will Smith's defining moments were blockbusters and box office records. Now, a single impulsive act competes with all of them. Was the slap the true downfall, or merely the confirmation of cracks that had been forming for years? Perhaps the deeper lesson isn't about one celebrity at all. It's about the fragility of image. In an era where personas are carefully curated and endlessly broadcast, the gap between who someone is and who they present can quietly widen. And when that gap finally shows, it doesn't take much to expose it. Success doesn't prevent collapse. Sometimes it accelerates it. The higher the pedestal, the harder the fall, and the more public the landing. For viewers who have watched Hollywood cycles repeat for decades, the pattern feels familiar. Rise, myth, fracture, reinvention. But Will Smith's journey feels uniquely modern because every stage unfolded in real time, amplified by social media, dissected frame by frame. He once symbolized control in an uncontrollable industry. Now he represents something more complicated, the cost of maintaining an image too long under too much pressure. And so the final question isn't whether Will Smith can work again. He can. It's whether he can rebuild trust, the quiet, intangible trust that once made audiences root for him instinctively. Can patience restore what impulse destroyed? Can humility repair what pride exposed? Or has the moment permanently redefined him? After everything you've seen, the dominance, the discipline, the public fracture, the attempted reinvention, what do you believe we're witnessing? A temporary fall? Or the unraveling of a persona that was never as indestructible as it seemed? To understand the stakes, consider Smith not as a caricature of celebrity but as a human being shaped by specific people and places. Imagine him alone in a quiet dressing room after a premiere, the hum of fluorescent lights, the faint scent of cologne, trophies gleaming behind glass. These rooms hold histories, headshots from different eras, scuffed sneakers from early shoots, a sticky note with a forgotten phone number. What does it do to a person to spend decades thinking the applause is the answer to everything? His background matters. The son of a single mother who taught him early about dignity and survival, Smith learned to convert charm into currency. That hunger explains his relentless drive, the need to be seen, to be applauded. But it also asks us to interrogate where ambition ends and self-protection begins. When the public sees missteps, do we judge the actor or the architecture of his upbringing that framed him? Those closest to him offer texture beyond headlines. A spouse who stood beside him through triumph and crisis, colleagues who alternately propelled and cautioned him, and younger artists who viewed him as both mentor and cautionary tale. Each relationship carved new fault lines and lifelines. What responsibility does an inner circle bear when they surround someone with power? When do loyalty and enablement become indistinguishable? Reinvention, too, can be an act of survival rather than a publicity move. He pitched intimate stories about fatherhood, scenes he wanted to film about men learning vulnerability. Off camera, he grappled with private regrets, missed family dinners, harsh words unsaid, moments where performance eclipsed presence. Those tensions fueled his attempts at change, not all successful, not all sincere, but often earnest. Can repeated attempts at reinvention be read as instability, or as the iterative work of someone trying to grow? The public, of course, is not neutral. Social media transformed spectators into participants, converting reactions into ritual. The slap did not exist only in the Oscars hall. It was uploaded, remixed, memed, and litigated across feeds. Instant verdicts hardened into cultural shorthand. But do snap judgments allow for nuance? How much space does a 24-hour news cycle leave for reflection, repentance, or rehabilitation? There are small gestures that complicate the narrative. A visit to a hospital room to hold a young fan's hand, a scholarship established in a struggling community, a late-night phone call to an old friend to say, "I was wrong." These acts do not erase a violent instant, but they suggest a person trying to repair. Can ritualized apology, the interviews, the essays, the songs, become meaningful when performed repeatedly, or does repetition desensitize us to sincerity? Artistic choices chart another path. His return to music felt like an attempt to speak in a medium where confession was easier than press statements. In a dim studio, he wrote lines that read like journal entries, favoring quiet beats that left room for words to breathe. He wanted listeners to arrive at conclusions rather than be guided to them. Yet audiences now listen through different filters: irony, skepticism, fatigue. Is there a place for a raw confession to land without being weaponized? Beyond the individual, the industry shifted. Studios recalculated risk. Where once a bankable star could carry a film despite controversy, reputation became a metric as volatile as box office forecasting. Marketing teams piloted messaging to see if audiences would forgive. Financiers ran numbers that treated moral perception as a budget line item. How will Hollywood's risk aversion reshape the kinds of stories that get told? The debate over separating art from artist intensified. Some argued that a film should stand on its own merits. Others insisted that context always matters. These are not abstract concerns. They carry employment consequences for hundreds of people on a single production. When do we demand accountability that effectively erases art, and when do we permit the work to exist apart from the maker? Perhaps the strangest thing about this saga is its ordinariness. Scandal now unfolds slowly, serialized across platforms. Podcasts and documentaries reframe gestures, each episode extending the public's attention and making it harder to move on. Yet this prolonged scrutiny also allows for deeper reflection, if we invite it. Could a culture that obsesses also become a culture that learns?